Hello, everyone. It is currently 3 o'clock Eastern Time on Thursday, February 10th. So it's time for another edition of the Tom's Hardware Show. Today, we're going to be looking at Dying Light 2 performance benchmarks and a few comparison screenshots. This game has been very hyped up for its technical aspect, so that should be interesting. And also last week we talked about crypto a bit, and there's some more crypto news. So we have Jared Walton in to discuss. But before we do that, let's roll the intro. So hello everyone, I am your host, Michelle Earhart. Welcome to another edition of the Tom's Hardware Show. As always, we are taking your questions live, so just go ahead and plop them in whatever comment box on whatever streaming service you're using to watch, and we'll address them throughout the show. Joining me is senior editor Jared Walton. Jared, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Just I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear that I'm running more benchmarks.
I'm curious to hear what those are about, but I assume we can't tell people quite
Oh
yet.
no, it's nothing secret. So like this side, you can see that's my new test bed back there, Alder Lake 12900K, and I've got the MSI 3080 12 gigabyte that I've been working on reviewing. I've run the numbers on it. I just haven't run the comparison numbers on the new test bed. So basically I have to run, 7 or 8 GPUs, high-end GPUs through the new test suite on the new test bed. So right now I think it's got an RX 6800 in there. That is the last of the cards I'm testing for the comparison review. So yeah,
How
just
hot does your office get, Jared? You're
uh,
always running tests, I feel like.
it's not too bad. I mean, I'm in the basement of my house, and it's Colorado in the winter. Like, if I
That's
get
true.
hot, I just need to open up the window and it will cool right off.
You recently got a new kitty, right? Does the kitty like the
Yes.
heat?
Yes. I was looking to see if I could spot him. He's probably hiding. Still does that. Yeah. He usually sits on. If he's in the office, he'll go and sit on a subwoofer that I've got over behind me.
I
It's his little perch.
I have a heater behind me, as you can see, and my cat likes to sit on that a lot, but she also likes to sit right on top of my desktop. She's actually, which it doesn't have like a upward facing vents, so it's not a huge deal. She has turned it off a few times by accident, though, to the point where Avram, our editor in chief, has said, you should make it so that the power button doesn't turn the desktop off. But I like having that ability. So I just like
Is the
put it
power
my
on the top of your
it
case
is,
then?
yeah.
Oh,
So I just put my Kindle over it so that the cat can't sit on it.
I had my dog stepped on the power switch to the power strip. Like it's been a few months, but he did that the one time, and I was like very very unhappy with him.
I don't think my cat's ever done that, but I have done that myself a few times because it's right down
Yes,
by my feet.
I've done that too, where you
Mm.
accidentally shift and you kick out, and you're like, oh crud.
Hopefully that doesn't happen during the show. Speaking of the show, I understand that you're here to share with us some Dying Light 2 benchmarks, right?
Yeah, Dying Light. I mean, it's not Halloween, but zombie killing
Yeah.
is always a good pastime,
It's
right?
not a franchise that I have a ton of history with, but I know that this one is supposed to be pretty impressive visually, at least. But I know that you made the spec line for your performance review, Dying Frames. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it.
I mean, so the original Dying Light was fairly taxing, and it has a full, dynamic lighting system where, daytime goes into nighttime in real time, not real time, but, at an accelerated real time. So, start getting darker as night approaches, and the zombies become more powerful and come outside at night, and so it becomes more dangerous. But other things are only really available at night, so you kind of balance that risk reward. The original, I don't know how many years ago it came out. It seems like it's been 4 or 5, but it was it was fairly taxing at the time, but as cards progressed, it became less so. Dying Light 2 includes, let's see, ray traced reflections, ray traced sun shadows, which that's the important one mostly because the sun, goes across the sky and you want to see the darkness, the shadows shifting around and stuff. It also has ray traced, what did I say? Reflections, sun shadows, ambient occlusion, and global illumination. So global illumination is like if you look at this PC behind me, it's got the colored lights glowing on it, right? Global illumination means like surfaces that have color will reflect around it. So, I mean, like the lighting off of that PC, it kind of makes the wall glow. But global illumination, when you're doing it with ray tracing, is more like if you have a red wall and a white wall next to each other, you'll get some color bleed onto the white wall from the red. So
Gotcha. And
it's fairly complex, right?
yeah. So for anyone who's unaware, Dying Light is like a first person kind of parkour game where you're running around, sort of running away from zombies in an open world. And then this one boasts like 500 hours of content, which sounds like a threat to me, but of course means like a lot of textures and stuff. Obviously, you can reuse a lot of stuff in an open world like that, send people to the same location again and again. But this is supposed to be, I guess, kind of a living world or unliving world that you spend a lot of time in.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, I read a PC Gamer's review of it, and he said he finished it in about 50 hours. That's the main storyline. When they talk about 500 hours, it's like going and completing every single side quest, and beyond that, which that will probably take 100 hours, I would assume. But it's if you want to unlock every skill and find every, like, special item or whatever. And that's where I kind of like lose interest after the 100 hours. I'm like, nope, I've seen the game, I've beaten the game. I don't need to run around and try and collect every little item.
I think the last time I did one of those side quests was getting all the feathers in Assassin's Creed
Oh
2.
yeah.
And then after I finished that, I was like, that was pointless and bad,
Stupid.
and I'm not doing it again. I do like
I
the parkour challenges in those. The tombs are
yeah.
the best because they're like little Mario levels, but I'm getting off topic.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of parkour challenges in Dying Light 2 where, it's basically you have to race around an open world. Like they don't sit there and give you a very clear guided path. It's like, here's your destination, go there, and when you get there, it lights up the next spot on the route. And so you're free to kind of experiment and try and figure out the fastest way to get around. And as you level up your character, there's two areas: you level up your combat and you level up your parkour skills. And so at first you're lacking in stamina, you don't run as fast, you can't jump as far. There's a bunch of things, and the first few hours felt kind of a bit of a slog where you're like, man, my guy is weak and slow, and I can't even climb buildings very well. Like I'm used to Assassin's Creed and such, where you're like, you climb halfway up the building and you turn around and look at what's going on around you. This, when you're climbing, you got the stamina gauge that starts depleting, and you're like, oh crud! And if it hits the bottom, you fall.
Shadow of the
So
Colossus, except
yeah,
probably not as that game is great. Anyway, we have a comment from James Zach who says, for those with kids and not jobs testing games, any advice on finding opportunities to game? My GPU feels unappreciated. Well,
yeah,
I guess you're lucky to have a GPU at this point.
that's right. You should be glad you have a GPU to underutilize. I don't have any real suggestions. I mean, I know back in my college days, my single days before children, I gamed a lot more. Now, my job involves testing GPUs, which involves benchmarking games and, playing games a little bit. But, there's so many games that I've tested for 40 hours but played for like 3 and never seen the ending, including I think every one of the recent Tomb Raiders, as well as the original Dying Light and Dying Light 2, and the
I
list
was
goes on
watching
and on.
a YouTuber recently who's like, by the way, guys, I don't like Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It's just what we all use to test because it's got a very useful benchmark. And the chat was like blown away. They're like, "Whoa, I thought it was one of your favorite games because you use it all the time."
No, I was happy to drop that from my list of games to test. I mean, and the big deal with Shadow of the Tomb Raider was ray traced shadows, which to me are like the least important of the ray tracing effects. I mean, sometimes they matter more, but in general, it's not like this, oh my gosh, like these shadows look so much better. Reflections, they can make a big difference because screen space reflections can help on certain views, mostly like puddles. You can reflect the what do you call it, the backdrop, whatever you see in the distance. You can do the screen space reflection, mirror it onto the puddle, do some stuff, and it looks decent. But if you face a wall with reflective windows or mirrors or whatever, then you generally don't get proper reflections without ray tracing or a lot of computational effort. So,
Well, speaking about ray traced reflections, you've sent me some screenshots, so this
yeah,
is a good opportunity to shift into the material. So here's one of the shots you sent me.
amazing reflections. So, this is the thing about ray tracing. Like, yes, those are reflections. You can see, what's behind, like, off the screen in those windows. And I want to say it was like a 20% performance hit to enable ray traced reflections. Even when you don't see much in the way of reflective objects, like you still get a performance hit. Flip to the next slide, and this is without ray traced reflections. And it's like, wow, I mean, so yeah, the windows definitely look more realistic, but if you don't have them, is it the end of the world? No.
Yeah. I had to imagine, like, this is like one building with a bunch of wilderness behind it, but a lot of this takes place in like a city, right? So I imagine if you get a bunch of those windows together, the
It
performance
could be.
drops even more.
I don't know. And I ran around looking for windows. I guess I'm not far enough into the game. There's apparently like a city center that you can unlock. I don't know how far into the game that happens, but you have to do some quests. And once you unlock the city center, then there's some more like high-rise buildings. The outside of the city where you begin, more or less, not much in the way of shiny reflective buildings. In fact, like all the car windows look pretty grubby, and so even if there are reflections, I didn't really notice them.
And this is why we always like to test games like Tomb Raider or Far Cry or whatever, because they come with built-in benchmarks that throw the game through most of the graphics, hurdles that you're going to run into while playing. This we have to, play the game and try to find an area that's a good test. You even said you like shifted the time to a specific time of day so that the night-day cycle wasn't bothering with it.
Yeah, and I don't know how much time of day really affects things. I mean, in an open world game, like lots of things can impact your performance. If you're running the same route, especially if you do a really long route, it's like, oh, well, zombies appeared that time, and rendering the AI and the creatures on for the game took more computer cycles and GPU cycles, and so things slow down. I didn't do like a super long route, and I avoided zombie areas for just that reason. But I would sleep until 8 a.m., which is when you wake up in the morning in the game. And then, like, that was what I'd do as the last step when I was done testing a GPU, so that when I put in the next GPU, it would be back to morning. And so, it'd take game time, it'd take like 2 hours. So when I tested high quality mode, it was at 8:20 a.m. and then it'd be 8:40 with the ray tracing mode, and 9 o'clock when I got to the high quality ray tracing. And so it'd take 2 hours or so of game time, and that way they're mostly lined up when the time of day occurred
Thank
for the
God for
testing.
those rest features, at least for our testing purposes.
Yeah, so you start at a hideout that has a bed, and you can rest until night and then rest until morning.
So we have
So
a couple of other shots of the outside of this building. Let me just actually make it so we can see the labels. So here's high quality with ray tracing
right.
and high quality, medium, and low.
So there should be a ray tracing, high quality ray tracing. Go, flip back to, oh,
Oh, sorry, we have a Slack message showing up. That's the problem with doing these shows.
yes. So is this one ray tracing?
Yeah, this one is ray tracing. It says
No,
HP ray tracing.
that's high quality ray tracing. That's the highest setting. Then there should
Hmm.
be one that's just ray tracing.
I don't
It's
know if I
missing.
got that one.
Oh, the ray tracing one, interestingly, it's like medium settings, but with ray traced sun shadows and ray traced ambient occlusion.
Tell you what, why don't I take this off screen and let
Well,
you talk for a little bit while I
yeah.
pull that up?
So the main thing to notice with the ray tracing versus high quality ray tracing was you didn't get reflections, and the shadows actually almost looked too much on like the grass for the ray tracing mode. So they looked overly dark. I guess if you don't have the comparison shots, you don't notice it as much. But in my pecking order of best looking is like the high quality ray tracing was at top. Then it was almost like I would prefer the high setting, which ran quite a bit faster over the ray traced setting, which only did like two of the ray tracing effects. And then below that, you'd have the medium and the low. Honestly, even at low settings, the game looks pretty good. So, you know, it's not one of those games where it's like, oh man, I can't run at maximum settings. It's going to look like trash. But conversely, I think it's still fairly demanding. Like if you have a 1650 and you run at low settings or medium settings, you'll probably get close to 60 frames per second. You can enable Fidelity FX Super Resolution if you don't have an RTX card. You can enable DLSS if you've got an RTX card. There's also linear scaling if you want to try that, which kind of is, it doesn't look really that great because it's just upscaling using, I think, bicubic filtering. But
Gotcha. Yeah, you said the game had like its own built-in upscaling features that weren't FSR or DLSS.
yeah, they just called it linear upscaling, which, like I say, I think it's just not even really doing it might do a sharpening filter after the bicubic filtering upscale, but it did look like awesome. So especially at 1080p, where you could upscale from like, I think the lowest, if you do the performance mode, it's upscaling like 1/4 of the resolution. So instead of 1920 by 1080, it upscales 960 by 540 to 1080p. And
Gotcha.
it's like, it looks about as good as you would expect. So relatively blurry, and you could still play it that way. The HUD still renders at your selected
Native
resolution.
resolution?
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. So here's the shot that you were telling me about, the regular ray tracing one.
Okay. So flip to ray tracing then.
This
And
is
so,
ray tracing.
well, I was going to say, so flip to high quality ray tracing.
Sure thing.
Do, do, do. So you can see the grass becomes like a little less dark, and the reflections on the windows go away when you switch to just ray traced the ray tracing preset. And then if you go to the high preset, then it kind of the grass gets lighter again, almost looks like the high quality ray tracing, but you still don't get reflections. So it's just it's kind of interesting that it's like they're trying to balance performance with quality. If you look at, well, maybe we should get to the benchmarks, shouldn't we?
Let us do that. Sorry, I'm trying to balance
You're
several different
juggling
screens at
things,
once.
yeah.
Yeah. So I have what I believe the window with the benchmarks is open. So here we go.
All right. So I did not test all the cards on the medium and low presets. You can see that it says high DX11. The game does default to DirectX 11 if you don't enable ray tracing. If you enable ray tracing, then it shifts to DirectX 12 Ultimate, which is kind of their rebranding of DirectX ray tracing. I also tested the 3060 and the RX 6600 XT on like all of the settings, turning down each thing at a time, as well as the presets. I don't think that Michelle has the graphs for that, but they're in the article, so you can see what all of the settings managed to do. And the short takeaway is basically ray tracing settings. Some of them matter quite a bit to performance. Others Surprisingly, like on the 6600 XT, like reflections mattered a lot. The sun shadow ray tracing mattered a bit, not as much as you maybe would expect. And then as like ambient occlusion going from ray trace down to none only improved performance like a few percent. But there was this big jump where it's like if you have any ray tracing features enabled, then it has to run with the DirectX 12 Ultimate API, which requires a restart, of course. But you know, as soon as you turn off all the ray tracing, then you get a fair boost in performance. So like you can see, um, sorry, I left my window. You
No
can
worries.
see. So here we've got like the 3050 got 55 frames per second. The 6500 XT kind of struggled a bit at only 40 frames per second. Um, and then everything above the 3060 and above was in the 80 frames per second range. So now if you flip to ray tracing, so this only enables a couple of the ray tracing effects, but it switches the API and it just tanks performance. So you can see a lot of the cards, I mean, they're half as fast, maybe not quite half as like it's not cut in half. It's cut by like 40% or 30%, I want to say. But it's a pretty substantial drop. And when you look at the high versus the ray tracing image quality, it's like, wow, that's a big hit for not a huge gain in fidelity. And then dropping from or going from high quality to going from ray tracing to high quality ray tracing, which enables all the ray tracing effects. I think that was only like another 10 to 15% drop in performance. So it's like really, if you want the best image fidelity, yes, high quality ray tracing. If you can't run at playable frame rates on high quality ray tracing, which you can see the 3050 is down at 26 frames per second, so is the 6600 XT. You could use DLSS or FSR to regain some of those lost frames, but at 1080p, if you're using like performance mode on either of those, you're going to see a fair amount of blurriness still, and you might get. I don't think you'd double your frame rates. You'd probably get like 50% higher at best. So it's like you can get into the 40 frames per second range with maxed out settings on the 3050 and the 6600 XT, but that's about as far as you can go. And of course, the 6500 XT really tanked. I think it got like 3 frames per
It
second.
doesn't even look like it's on this graph. Yeah.
It's not because
There's no point, right?
right. So if you flip to the ray tracing,
The regular
the
ray
one before that,
tracing.
yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. So that's with Fidelity FX Super Resolution at quality mode. It got 7.5 frames per second. Without Fidelity FX FSR, it was getting. I think it's like 3. It
You know,
was.
even I don't know. I feel like 30 is our baseline for what we consider playable, but I've been spoiled to the point where I don't really want to play anything below 60.
Yeah,
And just like if you want to go for an Nvidia, the lowest you can do for 60 is on this chart is a 3070 Ti, it looks like, or
yeah.
Ti. And then if you're going to go for AMD, the lowest is the 6800 XT.
Yeah, and this isn't even the high quality ray tracing. So flip to the high quality ray tracing because
Hmm.
that's where if you're going to enable ray tracing, that's what you need to aim for. And you can see, basically the 3070 Ti barely gets there. The 6900 XT, 6800 XT are in the 50
You
range.
don't even have any AMD cards that are above 60 on this.
Right. So you'd need to use high quality ray tracing. You'd need to use FSR at quality mode just to get 60, maybe even balanced mode. If you've got like a 6800 or 6700 XT, you might be able to get there. No, 6700 XT is 34 frames per second. So yeah, you'd need to double its performance. It's
It's almost
probably
like
not going to happen.
labeling these lower end cards, like the 3060 and the 6600 as ray tracing compatible is a big lie, and you should just get GTX instead.
I mean, they can do it, right? But well, the 6500 XT really can't. Like, it has too little memory, too narrow a memory bus, and not enough compute resources, so it totally tanks with ray tracing. Like almost nothing ray tracing enabled runs well on the 6500 XT in my experience. But the 6600 XT and above do okay, just not with maxed out ray tracing settings. And then if you're not maxing out the ray tracing settings, why are you ray
Why are you
tracing?
doing ray tracing?
Yeah.
Like you showed us the windows earlier, the low quality ray tracing looks very much like no ray tracing at all.
Yeah, it just does the shadows. So I mean, you could play with the settings, and you could be like, hey, you know what? I'll skip the ray trace shadows. I'll skip the ray traced ambient occlusion, but I want the ray traced reflections, and that's probably a viable approach. I still think you're going to be struggling in a lot of cases to get 60 frames per second on anything less than the fastest GPUs. So yeah,
Well, you said
here's
you could get some of those back with FSR and DLSS, right?
right. So here's 1440p, maxed out quality. And this time I did test with FSR and DLSS. So the AMD cards, I used FSR quality mode. Now, this is the question, and I don't have an answer. I would need to contact Techland and see if they'll tell me. But FSR technically has 4 modes: ultra quality, quality, balanced, and performance. Dying Light 2 lists quality, balanced, and performance. So I'm like, I guess the ultra quality mode doesn't exist. So ultra quality is hard to tell the difference between native and ultra quality. Quality mode, there's more visible like artifacts that if you know what you're looking for. DLSS quality mode is better looking, but only runs on RTX cards. So you can see 1440p with DLSS quality mode, we did get 60 frames per second still on the 3070 Ti, but the 3060 is down around 40 frames per second. The 3050 is still not getting 30 frames per second. So, you could go to a higher upscaling factor, but it wouldn't be as nice looking.
What if we
I
push
would
it?
say you could get away with it. You could get away with DLSS balanced mode and probably not feel too bad about it, especially at 1440p.
Yeah, 1440p is kind of like the balanced resolution already. Anyway,
Yeah. Yep.
but what if we push it all the way to 4K?
Then everything falls short of 60 frames per second. Even with DLSS.
Everything. Oh my god.
So, and this is why, like, DLSS is interesting because the higher your target resolution, then it's kind of the less of, well, it's not less, but like 1080p, if you're in performance mode, it would upscale from 540p, right? 1/4 the resolution to 1080p. And 960 by 540 just isn't a lot of data to work with. 720p data upscaled to 1080p is what DLSS quality mode does at 1080p. That looks okay. You can also upscale 720p to 4K using the ultra performance mode, which Dying Light 2 doesn't support. So you just go to the performance mode, and then you're upscaling 1080p to 4K, and it actually looks pretty good, and that would get you above 60 frames per second on the 3080 and above. But it's kind of one of those where you're like, well, 1080p, that's not a lot of pixels to render, and that's why they've got DLSS those, because you can take 1080p and use their AI enhancement to upscale to 4K, and it still looks pretty good. It doesn't look as good as native, but it runs a lot better than native, like probably close to twice as fast.
Did you test native 4K on this?
Yes, that's the 3090 got 31.6.
Okay, gotcha. I don't see it in my my charts.
There. Midway down.
Oh, okay, yes. I see it.
So there's
on the
black
same chart as
bars
this.
and gray bars, yes. The black bars are native, the gray bars are FSR or DLSS.
Gotcha.
It's not super visible, but there's method to my madness.
I'm actually surprised that it's only about a little over half the FPS of doing it with DLSS. I would expect it to get fewer frames. We have a question. Oh, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to say, so 4K DLSS quality is upscaling 1440p.
Okay.
And, so if you actually, so we got, 53 frames per second. Now flip back to the 1440p result.
Okay.
and you can see that at native, the 3090 got 59 frames per second. So basically, you're taking 59 frames per second at 1440p, and then it costs you about 10%, 12% to use DLSS upscaling.
So then DLSS at 1080p upscales from 720p, 1440p upscales from 1080p, and
For
4K upscales from 1440p, or
it's you got to do the math. I might not even have so it's supposed to be quality mode is 2x resolution upscaling.
oh,
So
of course there's
it's
different quality modes.
yeah, so it's the square root of 2, which is like 1.41, right? Um, uh, I can actually, yeah, 1.41. So you divide the resolution on the x and y, or the within the vertical, by 1.41, and that's roughly the resolution within a few pixels. That's quality mode. If you're doing balanced mode is 3x upscaling, so you have to divide by the square root of 3 on the x and on the horizontal and vertical resolution, which is like 1.73. So then it becomes a little trickier, and you're like, okay, what's what? Performance mode is easy because it's a half resolution on both the horizontal and vertical. So, if you're doing 1440p, you're actually upscaling 720p. If you're doing 4K, you're upscaling 1080p. If you're doing 1080p, you're upscaling 540p.
Gotcha.
But I
I was busy
believe,
looking up the answer to this question. What graphics engine is running the game? That would be the proprietary Chrome engine from Techland.
yeah.
Sorry to do a quick little thing, but I wanted to make sure I had that in my pocket.
So I guess technically, now that I say what the DLSS is doing, if you're running at 4K DLSS quality mode, it's actually upscaling like 2716 by hold on, let's see, 2160 divided by 1.41 by 1532. So it's
This is
it's
like the
not
perfect lead
1440p.
up to one of our viewer questions that I was going to look at earlier from Javier Perea, who asked graphic settings in games should, well, not asks, more of a comment really. Graphic settings in games should be easier. We need to be IT engineers to play a game. MSSA, FXSAA, da 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 da. Infinity options more. If you're a hardcore PC gamer who puts a lot of stuff, a lot of work into gathering your hardware, I assume you appreciate having that fine-tuned level of control, but it can get overwhelming. That's why I like those graphic settings that like have a little mouse over pop-up that tries to explain in layman's terms what things do for you. But that's a big reason why people play on console. It's
Yeah.
getting less like that than it was in like the Nintendo eras where you plug it in and it works, but you turn it on and theoretically it's supposed to work with the console.
And like Dying Light 2, this is why I stick with presets for a lot of recommendations, because that's the easy way of doing it. And I tested it. I can tell you right now that the settings that you can tweak, you can turn off asynchronous compute when you're in DirectX 12 mode. It's actually better to leave that on, whether you have NVIDIA or AMD. So anti-aliasing, you can turn it from high down to low. It barely affects performance because they're doing temporal AA calculations, which basically are pretty close to free. They're like a 1 or 2% performance hit most of the time. Motion blur, turning that off doesn't do much for performance. Particles quality
Does a
doesn't
lot
do
for my
much
eyes though.
performance. Yeah, motion blur does, or
Well, I
anti-aliasing
don't
does.
like motion blur
Yeah,
in
I don't
games.
I don't like it either. So I do like running with it off. Interestingly, Dying Light 2, the launch version had the 5 presets, and the ray tracing and the high quality ray tracing disabled motion blur. Then a patch came out that I think screwed things up, and when you switched to what should be the ray tracing preset, it turned on motion blur, and so then it would say medium again. And you're like, wait, I went from low to medium to high to medium. What's going on? And it took me a little while to figure out that, oh, it's screwing up and it's turning on motion blur, and so it says medium quality. Same with high quality ray tracing. So anyway,
You
going
can't
down the list,
wait, so you can't have motion blur and like high quality at the same time?
You can, but it doesn't like it shows as custom. I think if you there was just like a little bug in the menu there, it wouldn't
Gotcha.
show
Okay.
you quite what was going on. Um, so let's see the settings: asynchronous compute, anti-aliasing quality, motion blur quality, particles quality, contact shadows quality, ambient occlusion quality, global illumination quality, RT flashlight. You can turn ray tracing flashlight effects on and off. Those 8 settings, all of them hardly affected performance at all. The only ones that really mattered were sun shadows quality and and reflections quality, and of course, and fog quality. And then, of course, if you turn off all of the ray tracing options and just ran them at high settings, then you got a
The
big boost of
different
performance.
anti-aliasing options didn't affect the graphics that much?
Because there's only low and high,
Okay.
and they're both using temporal AA.
Okay, okay.
So most games use deferred rendering techniques where they're doing a whole bunch of like shader computations and such, and that doesn't play well with MSAA, the
That's
multi-sample
the most
anti-aliasing.
expensive kind, right? Or one of the
Yeah.
more expensive
Well,
kinds?
super sampling is some people would say super sample AA, but that's just rendering at a higher resolution and downscaling. So yeah, MSAA is usually the most expensive. Not a lot of games use it. Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead
Red
Redemption
Dead.
2, they use MSAA. I'm trying to think of what other games might. I think Forza Horizon 5 and 4 might have supported MSAA, but there's a ton of games, most Unreal Engine games, most games like Dying Light 2, where your only options are either temporal AA or DLSS kind of covers the AA itself, so it turns off temporal AA. And then some games will also still offer you SMAA, which is like subpixel morphological anti-aliasing. It's
It all has to
generally
do with like how much of the pixel and screen they look at when they calculate
yeah.
anti-aliasing, right?
Yeah, so SMAA, TAA, and FXAA, fast approximate AA, are all post processing computations run on shader cores. And so, of those three, I think most game developers have settled on temporal AA as being the best balance between quality and performance. SMAA, some people would say it can look better than TAA. It doesn't look as blurry, but it tends to be a little more demanding. And then MSAA is like the game engine doesn't support it properly without doing a bunch of extra work that the game developers don't want to do.
Gotcha. So I have another viewer question from Javier Perea. Is this game using above 6 cores? I assume the bottleneck is the graphics card.
Generally speaking, the bottleneck's going to be your graphics card. I think it probably scales up to about 6 core. I mean, it depends on your CPU, of course, but I didn't take the time to test a bunch of CPUs just because I don't have as many CPUs around
Yeah.
to test.
You're
And
working on the 12 gigabyte one in the background right now, right?
I'm not doing anything on it. It's just powered on. I need
Oh,
to
I thought you were
run.
doing a benchmark on it.
No, it's got Dying Light 2 is sitting at the menu.
Oh shoot. Okay.
But most of the benchmarks you have to babysit them, so I'd have to pause every 2 3 minutes to go over there and restart the
That's
benchmark.
true. I remember that. Especially like I for a little a side note, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, for as often as we use it as a benchmark, it breaks all the time and constantly like lowers the quality of the benchmark without telling you. So you have to like run it a few times in a row and like comparison test to make sure that nothing suspicious is happening. Just a fun little story about what it's like to do our jobs.
Yeah, you can't like it's funny because I know of some sites that I won't name names that have automated all of their gaming benchmarks. Fully automated. They start a script, they walk away, come back 12 hours later or whatever, and you've got your results. I've tried automating game benchmarks in the past, and you know what? They break so often where like when you look at charts, like if we've got the 1440p result here, if you looked at this chart and you saw like the 3080 beating the 3090, or you saw the 3090 getting higher average frame rates but the minimum frame rates were like half of the 3080's minimum frame rates, that says there's a problem.
Yeah, you'd want
That
to run it
something
again.
didn't work right. And there are people who do fully automated testing that they get that sort of crap in their benchmark results all the time. And, if you're not babysitting it and paying attention, then you miss stuff like that really easily because you're on a time crunch or whatever. So, it's like you have to check and make sure. And, there's games sometimes where a graphics driver might cheat and you're like, hey, wait a second, why does this not look right? I haven't
Metro
encountered that.
Exodus is another really finicky one because it wants you to, I don't know, with me at least, every time I start the benchmark, it wants me to log into Epic or
Oh,
whatever. And then the browser pops up, and
yep,
sometimes that'll, ruin the test window
yep.
from showing up or whatever.
Yeah, Metro can be a pain. Uh, there's pluses and minuses to just about every game benchmark out there, but yeah, you do want to pay attention, and that's kind of what I have to do. So,
Yeah.
I don't play games for a living. I just test them.
So speaking of benchmarks, are there any notes that we didn't address? I suppose we have some screenshots that we didn't look at, but I do want to move on
Yeah,
to our other topic for the show if we have a sort of
yeah. So
exhausted
let's
dying
see.
light too.
I can't tell which that one looks like. It's probably the
Here,
ray
I
tracing.
believe this is the lowest quality one.
Oh, okay, so there's low, and you can tell like even at low, you're like that actually looks pretty dang good compared to a lot of games. You could play that and not really be sad. And I would say anything like GTX 1650 or RX 6500 XT and above will probably get 60 frames per second at the low setting. It's not the highest fidelity, but it's still enjoyable. So, you know, that would be probably medium.
This is ray tracing.
Oh,
Then
so
this is
okay.
high, this is medium.
Yeah, they're not
Let
coming
me
in
let me
order.
actually go back here. We have low, medium,
Yeah, so
high.
and the
Here, I'll let you
differences
talk.
between those three are like very slight. Like if you sit there and stare at things, you're like, oh, I can see the ambient occlusion starts showing up a bit more, or some of the shadows get a little more well defined. They're using higher resolution textures, but the differences between those three are quite small. Then when you get to the ray tracing, again, it
This is
seems
ray
like
tracing.
you see how heavy the shadows got on some of the stuff, and it's like well, on its own, it's not bad, but when you compare it to the high mode, you're like, wait, it runs slower and it just looks like it's got excessive shadows.
It's funny too, because back before ray tracing, when I didn't know what I was doing and just like getting into PC gaming, the very first thing I would turn off to increase performance was shadows.
Yeah, it's usually a good one.
I'm
Shadows,
willing to
reflections, and
sacrifice it.
fog.
Yeah.
Yep, those are the three
Um,
big ones.
but if you
And
love
then,
shadows, here you go.
and then if you could switch to the full
the
high
the
quality ray
highest ray
tracing,
tracing.
yeah. So this was interesting, and I don't know why, but there's like these gaseous clouds that showed up only on that mode. I think it was just like a distance thing that
It
that
wasn't like a gameplay thing.
I don't think so, but
This
like
noxious green fog.
yeah, there's like that's a military convoy that broke down and got destroyed by the
That's your
zombies.
Nvidia fog right there.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was just because that was the first thing I snapped. I think it was just a distance where the highest quality mode basically rendered it, whereas the other modes were like, it's far enough away that we don't need to show it yet. But I'm not
Jared, when
I'm
you
not
play a
entirely
game
sure.
without a built-in benchmark, do you feel like a photojournalist?
Eh, something like that. I mean, you're sitting there running around trying to figure out where should I take screenshots that actually show something meaningful, and you know, maybe this isn't the best example of what would highlight the differences, but the reality is, if you have to look that hard to find things that show the difference, then it probably doesn't matter.
I mean, I think it's very important to take these screenshots.
Yeah.
When I like first started in games journalism, one of my first things the one of my editors told me was never include bull shots in a review, which is a nice little portmanteau of screenshot and I can say this on YouTube, right? Bullshit.
Yeah.
Which is just like the screenshots that developers provide to make their game look the prettiest it possibly can.
They actually have artists that are like they're given tools to sit there and pose things in the engine in the game and try and create the effect they want. And so it's like it's not even a gamer doing it. It's someone who understands photography and composition and graphic art, and they're like, "Oh, what would look really cool? Oh, well, we should have this zombie coming in this way." And so you get these screenshots, bull shots that you're like, "Wait, there's no way this screenshot could actually happen because it's got these three characters where you could only play one of them."
And now every game has a photo mode, and to a degree, I like that. I like giving players tools for creativity, but on another hand, it's kind of like, here, players, you do our marketing for us and
That's
make the
right.
game look as best as it
We'll
possibly
make a
can.
photo contest and then we'll use the winners as our marketing.
Yeah, so you always want to be careful when you see those kind of things and take into account of what the game will actually look like when you're running it for most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
Uh,
Anyone
so
got any questions on Dying Light 2 before we run off?
let's
Not run
see.
off, but go to a different subject?
Do you have details for graphics for low? So let me oh, I full screen the wrong thing. Yep, so these are the low graphics. And let's see if I can actually go to the low on the other one. And these are more low graphics. Again, any of the graphics without ray tracing, it doesn't really look that difference between low, medium, and high.
So if they're asking for performance, I didn't test every card on the low and medium settings, but the 3060 got it got 77 frames per second at what's it called? 77 frames per second at high. Then it got 87 frames per second at medium and 104 frames per second at at low. And then the 6600 XT got 88 frames per second at high, 106 at medium, and 142 at low. So compared to the high quality benchmarks that are shown in my article and that we looked at here, basically the low quality setting probably boosts performance up to 50%.
Gotcha. So thank you for sharing that. Since we are coming up on time and I do want to spend a few minutes moving about another topic, I notice I've been seeing a lot of viewer questions asking about graphic card stock again. And how long we think the stock shortage is going to last and how that'll affect PC gaming in the long run, which I think is a good transition to our next topic, which is last week we shared all our lovely hot takes about crypto since crypto was having a dip. And now we have more crypto news. I know, Jared, you are kind of our unwilling crypto expert since you're also our GPU expert. What are your thoughts?
So I looked at the profitability last week, and even the 3090, so like a $2,500 graphics card in the current market, was down to netting after power costs like $3.50 a day, which at that point you're like, oh man, that's like a lot of time to break even to recoup your investment, and the GPU might die if you're mining for 3 years straight. And the latest news is that the cryptocurrencies, naturally after we celebrated and said, "Yay,
I
they went
knew it
down,"
would
they went
happen.
back
I
up.
knew it
I
would
know.
happen.
I've joked sometimes with like Paul and the other people at Tom's Hardware where I'm like, yeah, all we need to do is write an article hailing the death of cryptocurrency and it will rebound and
When we
make
were
us look like
discussing
fools.
whether or not to write that crypto profitability article, I was like sitting in the back of my head thinking, should I bring up that this is probably going to change very soon because it's a very volatile market?
Yeah, I mean, it just keeps going up and down, up and down. We are not back to the highs by any means. Like right now, Bitcoin's at 44,000, Ethereum's at 3,100. A week ago, they were about 15% or so lower than that. So it did change a fair amount. Like what, last week, here, we'll pull it up. Last week, Bitcoin was down to like 36,000. So now it's, got up 8,000 in just a week, and prior to that it had probably dropped 8,000. So it's like it did this short-term dip. Where's it going to end? We don't know. Ethereum, I keep on waiting for it to go proof of stake, because if and when that happens, that will really kill off the profitability of mining. Like if you look at most most GPUs for what's the best coin to mine, like it's always Ethereum right now. And so if you have like a 3080 right now and you say, hey, what's my most profitable option for mining? Ethereum can earn you probably $4 a day, maybe a little bit more. Whereas without Ethereum, the next most profitable coins are down at around $2 per day. And when you're paying $1,600 for a card, $2 per day doesn't seem like a whole lot, especially if you're trying to game half the day and mine half the day. You're like, oh, now I'm only earning $1 a day. That's almost not worth doing. The massive crypto rush last year, that was when the 3080 was doing like $10 to $15 a day. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, at those prices, it was inevitable that the miners would just have a party and be like, oh my gosh, we're going to be billionaires. And I'm sure if they went through with it starting last year, they're probably all in the black. But people who are starting right now would not be in the black. And so hopefully they're not starting with new miners and the miners aren't expanding and all that stuff. But
Right.
it's tough
You
to say.
by the time you hear about it, you're usually the person that they are trying to sell to, which puts them in the black, right?
Yeah, it's that Ponzi scheme. Like, hey, everyone should start hoarding cryptocurrencies and drive the price up because I already mined a bunch of cryptocurrencies
Mm-hmm.
and I want the price to go up. I think Elon Musk got in trouble for that.
He did. Not to get too off topic, but proof of stake always baffles me. It would be good for graphic card supply, arguably good for the environment, although there's a bunch of details there that we don't have time to get into. But it baffles me because like I'm not a big believer in crypto, I'll just say it, but it feels like it goes against the heart of crypto or the idea at the inception of crypto.
Yeah,
Because it's
it's
like the more you have, the more you earn with proof of stake, which is the very opposite of the original pitch of crypto. Granted, the pitch and the intention are maybe different things, but
well, and it's not even. I don't even think it's the more you have, the more you earn as a percentage. Like proof of stake is usually it just turns it into from a race to get the solution to a complex mathematical formula. It's a lottery system where it's like, hey, whoever is holding this stuff, they have a chance. So if you
mm-hmm.
have 50% of a coin, you will find 50% of blocks. But realistically, most coins, it's going to be, the holders might have a few percent at best for the big ones, like Ethereum. And
Right.
so they would win a few percent of the blocks and get the bonuses. But holding the coins basically costs you nothing. It doesn't
Right. So it
require
kind of like
power.
centralizes the power more in a few already wealthy users, which is what dollars do. But
Yeah.
you know, so it makes me question what the point is, but stuff like that also means people who already have a lot of dollars are willing to get into crypto more, which moves me on to my next point, which I think the big real crypto news out of this week that kind of sent a shiver down my spine is that Microsoft is looking into getting into crypto.
Yeah, and Intel also has their what's it called Bonanza mining, which some company has ordered a whole bunch of them sight unseen, like they don't exist yet, but Intel is
Is
working
that
on
a
them.
GPU?
No, it's a custom ASIC as far as I
Oh,
understand.
okay,
So
okay.
it's a I think it's a Bitcoin ASIC. So it's just a chip designed to do lots and lots of SHA
I was
256
thinking it was going to be an ARC
calculations.
companion for a second there.
Yeah. No, so as far as we're aware, ARC has not been targeting crypto specifically. That doesn't mean it can't do it, but it will require coders and developers to probably put in a bit of effort to make it work properly. Like someone did some benchmarks of the Apple M1 Max doing Ethereum mining, and they're like, "Oh, look, I can get 16 megahash per second." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's because you're probably using a really poorly coded hack to make it run the calculations because on paper the M1 Max ought to be able to do more like 40 to 50 mega hash. So, if you don't optimize it, you're getting half or a third as much hash rate. So, I think for the first few months of Intel Arc's existence, if it's even viable for crypto, meaning like has enough bandwidth and such, it will probably be significantly slower than the AMD and Nvidia cards, and so miners will be less interested unless the miners are like, hey, I'm going to take a chance and buy cheap GPUs and then pay people to do software development to make these GPUs fast, which honestly, I think that's what's happened with Nvidia's stuff. Like I bet you there's big mining farms that have custom coded firmware or drivers or something that gets around the light hash rate locks because those cards still seem to sell awfully fast otherwise.
We have a question here from James Zach who says, crypto, what's behind it other than consumed energy? At least copper slash gold are real things that can be used to build other things. I assume we're asking what backs it as opposed to like what are the forces that are pushing crypto,
Math.
which is a very big thing. But yeah, math backs it. Generally, things
It's a
are
bunch of
only
math nerds
yeah,
going,
the thing with
yeah,
money is it's like it's not a hard fast thing. It's a social construct. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value, but it only has value if people agree it has value. And
yeah, and
for some
that's
reason right now we're agreeing that being able to complete a lot of arbitrary equations gives you value, which is where the speculation comes in because the market is unsure whether or not that's a thing that gives value and people want to have the asset in case the market decides that it has value. And that's also why you're seeing things like NFTs, because it's like, oh, here's a practical use for crypto, but that's getting debunked in a lot of different ways too. So it's very much in flux, which is historically something the market doesn't like. It doesn't like things that are unsure, but we're seeing bigger investments from companies like Intel and Microsoft, and we're seeing the crypto market recover a little bit this week after a huge dip last week. So we can't really say what the state of it is right now or what it's going to be, but there
well, the
are
hard thing
forces
is,
that are currently deciding on it.
yeah, and the hard thing is like monetary systems are regulated, like the US dollar and the euros and the pounds and all these other currencies. They're regulated by governments, and they fluctuate, but they don't fluctuate by 10% or more in a single day. Like that's catastrophic. And there are things in place to try to prevent that from happening. If the market, if the US dollar dropped 10% in a day, it would cause mass panic and all sorts of problems. Well, that makes them less prone to being manipulated as well. And there's more of them, so it's harder to manipulate. So you've got governments getting involved in controlling it. Crypto, there's not any real regulation, or at least there's very little compared to your normal financial systems. And so, like, there is for sure market manipulation that happens in the cryptocurrency world. It's pseudo anonymous. Some coins are even fully anonymous, but basically it's harder to track down who's doing what. So, people are able to cause, rich people are able to cause the markets to fluctuate pretty badly.
Right. And this is
And
something that people who are into crypto like know and still do crypto anyway, and they have terms for it. So there's like a term called rug pull, where like someone takes someone else's art and mints a bunch of NFTs off of it and makes it look like an official thing. And they're like, oh, if you buy this NFT, we're going to use the money from that to make a game. And then they pocket all the money off of the edition, off the first mint, and then just abandon the project.
yes,
So there's a bunch, and that's like one of the more innocuous things you can do with it. Of course, there's also like money laundering in the same way there is in the fine arts market. There's a whole bunch of it's an asset. It calls itself a currency, but because the value of Bitcoin, like one Bitcoin is $500 or whatever, it's really more of an asset akin to a stock, and so that's how it's being used right now. Except it's a more unregulated one.
yeah, and as long as anything is defined, like any of these cryptocurrencies, when people talk about like Ethereum's worth $3,000 or whatever, I'm like, that kind of defeats their whole purpose right there. As long as you are defining its value by our regular fiat currencies, like you're not getting away from the dollar, you're not getting away from the euro, you're just pretending to and using it as a big excuse for your Ponzi scheme is how I view it.
Exactly. Now, there are people who say that the blockchain technology underlying crypto has some use for it and that you can make like unique digital tokens for people. And you're like, oh, you could put medical records on it or you could put social security stuff on it. But at the same time, not only is there like a huge barrier to entry to actually using the blockchain, but there's also like it's still very insecure in some ways. People are
Try
stealing
and get your grandma
crypto
to
all the
use
time.
blockchain for her social security checks.
I think my favorite crypto like scam I've seen recently is apparently you can just like deposit NFTs into people's digital wallets so long as you know the address and they can't remove the NFT. And then the NFTs, all that makes a token an NFT is it has a smart receipt that comes with a little packet of code that lets it do a thing. And that's where people saying all the technology is with it, right? But because it contains code, it can also be malware. So you can take an NFT that is malware, plop it into someone's wallet without their consent, and then they can't delete it, they can't click on it, they can't interact with it at all because if they do, that'll activate the malware. And people are doing that to a lot of celebrities right now, which is funny because then they'll go on Instagram or TikTok and point that out. So I guess the short answer is like, what's backing it? A lot of things right now. Math, is that something that's valuable? We don't know, but because it could be valuable, people are pouring a lot of money into
Welcome to our dystopian future.
it. And in the meantime, all of this really makes it hard to game. Is the thing. So power to GameStop. It's funny. I was thinking of this other day. I don't want to get too off top, but the GameStop slogan is like power to the players, right? Which I thought was very funny then when they started getting into crypto, because that's the opposite of giving the power to the players. That's
Yep.
power to the crypto minds, literally power.
Big businesses are going to big business, basically.
Yeah. In the meantime, though, we'll continue to, Jared does have his review units for his graphics cards, and we'll continue to bring our tests to you and give you as much, market knowledge as we can. So hopefully, whenever they come to your area at an appreciable price, you can get them. Any final points, Jared?
No, not really. I'm trying to think of what other big games are coming up. Dying Light 2, I know was on my radar for a while. I'm not sure if there's
Other
any
big like
others.
triple A PC games. We just had the God of
We're
War
we're in a
port.
slow period, it feels like
There's
now,
the
so
new Horizon sequel coming up, but that's
oh
not going to
yeah.
come out on PC first, I think, or at the same time.
It'll be interesting to see what happens there. Like we talked about this on a previous episode, I think, where we were saying, Sony probably made enough money from porting games to PC that they're now starting to go, maybe we don't need to have a year or 2 year gap. Maybe we can actually just get some of those PC gamer dollars. So I hope Horizon Far West, I think is what it calls, comes to PC sooner than later.
Yeah,
I mean, the
Horizon Forbidden West.
Forbidden West, Far
Yeah.
West, Forbidden West,
Not
same
not
difference.
to not to really nail it home. There's also Final Fantasy 7 2 Remake 2 was announced recently. That also started out as a Sony exclusive and came to PC. I don't know if that's going to be the same case here. Final Fantasy Origin is coming out soon. That might come to PC at the same time. Aside from that,
I'm not a
honestly, the
Final
things I'm
Fantasy
looking
fan.
forward to are on Switch right now, but that's not really something that we test hardware for. We could.
Yeah. I'm waiting for probably not until the fall is when we'll get another slew of major games,
Yeah.
but that'll
I
keep my
think
benchmarks
yeah,
a little
early
more
year tends
static.
to be like that for games. I think the big thing in PC gaming right now is the Steam Deck, which comes out later this month and will actually make a lot of old games interesting from a testing perspective again because we'll be able to test compatibility with the Steam Deck. But that's not for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch that are coming, but I don't have them on my radar yet because they don't have really firm release dates. What
I
Total Warhammer 3 is that? Total War Warhammer 3 is that out next month or this month?
I don't know. Oh wow. I was looking at a user comment here. Wow on mobile. That's something I had not heard, but I just Googled it. Oh, 7 days ago, a week ago, Blizzard announced WoW on mobile. I should know this better. To be honest, I haven't been paying attention to Blizzard a lot ever since the stuff came out about that studio, but now Microsoft is buying it, so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
Mobile can definitely run WoW. WoW is very old.
Yeah.
Again, that's not really, we don't typically test mobile games a ton, but I mean, that's good for WoW players.
I I don't play WoW. I
I play
refuse.
Final Fantasy, award-winning RPG Final Fantasy 14 with critically acclaimed expansion Heavensward and free trial to level 60 with no restrictions on playtime. That's the meme. And on that meme, we are well over our typical ending time. So I think I'm going to call it on the show. But thanks so much for the interactions on the chat. Always happy to stay longer to talk with you guys. And oh, it's a kitty.
This is Clover. Actually, it's now Lucky because we thought Clover was a girl. It's a boy.
Okay, well, now I have to
Goodbye.
stay for another hour to talk about Clover. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Jared. Thank you for joining us, Lucky, now. And we will see you next week, Thursday at 3 p.m. Bye, everyone.